My name is Evan Lorne, and for the past 9 years, I've worked as a wilderness guide in Jasper National Park, Alberta. My job is mostly routine. Lead small groups along the backcountry trails. Teach them how to read a map, how to keep food sealed from bears, how to listen when the forest speaks softly enough that you can still tell it's only the wind. Most days, the rhythm of it is predictable: boots in dust, boots in mud, boots in snow. Nature humbles people that way, stripping everything decorative down to what survives. Yesterday wasn't like that. Our group had set out from the trailhead near Malign Canyon early in the morning, aiming for an overnight site past Medicine Lake, near a ridge that overlooked the valley. It's a trail I've done dozens of times, but this was a new group. 5 tourists from Edmonton, 1 couple from Germany, and a solo traveler from Vancouver who said she needed the silence. That's what she told me when we loaded gear at dawn, her voice brittle with exhaustion. We started steady. The first few miles rose through spruce and pine, the air sharp with the kind of cold that never fully leaves the mountains, even in summer. By noon, clouds had begun to knit together, pulling a thin gray seam across the sky. I called for a break near a shallow creek so everyone could refill bottles. That was when I noticed something strange. The sound of water wasn't right. At first I thought it was my imagination. The creek gurgled normally, but underneath there was another tone. A low, rhythmic hum, like someone humming into a pipe from deep below the surface. It wasn't constant, it pulsed. Every few seconds, it came and went like breathing. I crouched by the bank, scanning for whatever might cause it. Pressure under ice, a shifting rock, air pockets. Nothing visible. When I looked up, a few of the guests were staring too, heads tilted, faces uncertain. One of the Germans muttered, "Maschinen," as if maybe there was something mechanical under there. But there were no pipes, no cables, nothing but alpine mud and glacier runoff. "Probably just trapped air," I said. "Ice melt does weird things to sound." That explanation usually settles people. But as we hiked on, the humming seemed to move with us. It came faintly through the soil when we crossed wooden bridges, then vanished when the trail rose toward higher ground. By mid-afternoon, the air had cooled further, though the forecast hadn't called for rain. The quiet started to feel heavy, the kind of silence where even your own breathing sounds too loud. The Vancouver woman, her name was Claire, stopped beside me as we rounded a bend. "Do you hear it too?" she asked. I didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "Yeah, I've been trying to place it. It feels close," she said. Like it's underfoot, we pressed on. The last stretch toward camp follows a narrow corridor between tall ridges. The trees there grow thin, their roots tangled in scree, their needles sparse. That's when I saw something that made me pause mid-step. A tree, about 20 feet off the path, had strips of bark peeled and clean, vertical lines from the base up to eye level. Not random claw marks, smooth, almost surgical. Beneath, the inner wood shone pale and wet. But what caught me was what hung from one of the strips, a piece of fabric, pale blue, fluttering in the faint wind. "Stay here," I told the group and went closer. The fabric wasn't weathered. It was recent. Nylon, the corner of a jacket maybe. I crouched, examining the bark. The cuts were too even for any animal I knew of, and too deep for a knife. They looked as though something had been dragged upward, not downward. Behind me, one of the Germans took a photo. I wanted to tell him not to, but his flash fired before I could say anything. The light struck the bark, and for half a heartbeat, the pale wood seemed to ripple. It could have been the reflection of light in my eyes, but it made me step back all the same. We reached the campsite around 6. The lake below was calm, that perfect silver stillness Jasper evenings are known for. Everyone was tired but in good spirits, laughing, cooking noodles, taking pictures. I sat by the water, filtering more drinking water, when Claire came over and knelt beside me. "I saw something," she said quietly. My first instinct was to sigh. Every trip has one person who claims to see something unexplainable. Usually shadows, sometimes wildlife in the distance. But there was something about the way she said it, measured, not frightened, that kept me from brushing it off. "What did you see?" I asked. "When you went to look at the tree," she said. There was someone behind you. I looked up sharply. One of the group. She shook her head. No tall, standing between the trees. But it wasn't solid. I stared at her. Not solid. It looked like the trees were moving through it. She whispered. Like the forest didn't see it as separate. I tried to reason through it. Could have been mist. A trick of light, her eyes adjusting from bright trail to shade. I wanted to believe that. But then as dusk deepened, the humming returned. Faint, rising from the ground like the purr of a distant engine. The sound made the tent stakes tremble. I checked them myself. No loose lines, no wind. Still, the ground seemed to pulse. I stepped toward the edge of camp, past where the tree line thickened again. That's when I realized the hum wasn't random. It had rhythm. 3 pulses, pause, 2 pulses, pause, over and over, like a signal. I walked further, flashlight cutting a narrow path of white between the trunks. Everything beyond that beam dissolved into darkness. I crouched, pressing my hand to the ground. The vibration was faint but distinct, like the earth itself was breathing. Then, somewhere beyond my light, something moved. At first, I thought it was one of the guests, maybe looking for a private spot. But the movement was too low, too smooth. A shape slid between trees, not walking but gliding, soundless except for the faint brush of branches. I stood very still. The air turned colder, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The beam of my flashlight caught something. A curve of pale color, maybe fabric. But when I focused, it wasn't fabric, it was skin. Bare, almost luminous. The shape froze, half shadowed, half seen. I couldn't make out a face, only the outline of shoulders long and narrow. Then it was gone. I stayed there for several minutes, trying to listen past the blood in my ears. When I finally turned back, the humming had stopped. The silence afterward was absolute. Back at camp, the others were already zipped inside their tents. I sat by the fire a long time, watching the embers pulse in and out like breathing. Every so often I thought I saw motion at the far edge of the clearing. Something tall, still, almost blending with the trees. But it never came closer. Sometime near midnight, Claire unzipped her tent and stepped out. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "It's under the ground," she whispered. "I can feel it." Before I could ask, she grabbed my wrist and pressed my hand into the dirt beside the fire ring. The soil was faintly warm, though the night air had dropped below freezing. Beneath it, deep down, something thrummed in steady rhythm. I wanted to tell her it was just groundwater, or shifting stone, or the echo of our own movement. But the sound didn't behave like anything natural. It paused when we paused, resumed when we moved. Almost like it was listening. We stayed awake until dawn, neither of us saying much. The rest of the group stirred around 7, unaware of what had happened. The hum was gone, the air quiet again. For a few hours, I let myself believe it had all been nerves, some shared hallucination born from exhaustion and altitude. Then, when we packed to leave, I noticed something. Near the edge of the site, right where the grass met the forest floor, were prints. Not animal, too elongated. Each mark was a narrow oval, pressed deep as though something heavy had stood there for a long time. And beside them, the dirt rose slightly, as if something had pushed from below, shaping the earth around it. I didn't mention it. I just brushed the soil smooth with my boot and told everyone to stay close on the hike back. But as we left the ridge and descended toward the canyon, I felt it again. The faintest pulse under the ground, keeping pace with our steps. And for the first time in my years guiding in Jasper, I didn't look back. We started our descent just after 9, the sun still low and white behind the ridge. From above, Medicine Lake looked calm again, glassy and perfect, as if the night hadn't happened. The others were joking about breakfast when we left camp, their laughter carrying through the pines. No one mentioned the strange sound. Maybe they'd slept too heavily to notice. Maybe Claire and I were the only ones who'd really felt it. I let them walk ahead for the first stretch, pretending to double-check the gear. Truth was, I wanted a few extra minutes alone. The air had a weight to it, thick with that damp mineral smell that comes before rain. When I glanced down at the path, I noticed the prints again, faint, but still there, not ours. Too long in proportion, no distinct heel, just soft impressions tapering to nothing at the toe. They ran parallel to our route for several yards, then vanished where the soil turned to rock. I forced myself to keep moving. The rule in the backcountry is simple: the forest gives signs, but not explanations. Look too long at the wrong one, and you'll miss the rest. By mid-morning, the group had spread out across a stretch of narrow trail hugging the canyon's edge. Below us, water rushed in distant echo. Far down where the limestone folded in on itself, the Germans were taking photos. The couple from Edmonton argued over who packed the trail mix. I watched their boots move steady and sure over the rock. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Then Claire stopped ahead, stiff as if she'd hit an invisible wall. I caught up and followed her gaze down toward the canyon floor. Something pale was standing in the shadows between boulders, too far to see clearly, but tall, motionless. It might have been a tree trunk, except it stood alone, no roots, no branches, just there. When a cloud drifted across the sun, the shape seemed to fade. Then, as light returned, it shifted slightly, not stepping but gliding sideways. My heart kicked hard in my chest. "Do you see that?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "It's been there since we started walking." "Could be light through the mist?" I said, though I didn't believe it. We stayed frozen for nearly a minute until one of the others called back to ask if everything was fine. I forced a smile, waved them forward, and when I looked again, the shape was gone. We kept moving, faster now. The trail narrowed further, and the wind picked up, whistling low across the ridges. Every gust seemed to carry a faint echo, that same humming pattern from last night. 3 pulses, pause. 2 pulses. I told myself it was coincidence, the wind threading through cracks in the stone. But the rhythm was too precise. At the halfway mark, we stopped for lunch in a small meadow rimmed by trees. The mood stayed light. I tried to match it, to seem relaxed, even as I kept scanning the perimeter. Claire sat apart on a log, staring at the ground like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. When I asked if she was okay, she just said, "It's closer now." The others didn't notice. They joked about bears, mosquitoes, the usual. The sound came again while I unpacked sandwiches. A faint vibration under my boots, steady as a heartbeat. This time, I watched the surface of my water bottle. The liquid trembled in perfect sync with the pulses. I looked up sharply and saw, across the meadow, a line of trees swaying out of rhythm with the wind. They leaned slightly forward, then back, as though responding to something underground. The movement spread in a wave until even the tall spruce at the edge seemed to bow, then rise again. The group went silent, watching. "Is that an earthquake?" one of them asked. I wanted to say yes, to give them something rational to hold on to. But the ground didn't shake, it breathed. The air itself seemed to press against our skin, warm then cold, warm again. Then came the smell, wet iron, faint and sour like rust stirred in water. Claire whispered something under her breath that I couldn't make out. I called for everyone to pack up. We needed to move. The trail looped down through thicker forest, where daylight broke into narrow ribbons through the canopy. Every sound echoed twice, once from ahead, then faintly behind, a beat late. Our footsteps, our voices. Even the crunch of gravel repeated as though the forest were mimicking us with a slight delay. At one point, I turned to check our tail and froze. A figure was walking at the very back of the line. Tall, thin, dressed in something gray. I counted heads, 8 guests. The 9th figure didn't fit. I blinked, and it was gone. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my throat. I told myself it was a trick of distance, one of the Germans lagging behind and catching light differently. But every time I looked again, the number ahead stayed the same. We reached the next rest point by late afternoon. The group gathered by a small clearing overlooking the valley. I moved among them, checking everyone off again. 8. Always 8. Claire came up beside me. "You saw it too." I didn't answer. The wind picked up, sharp enough to sting the eyes. Far below, the treetops shifted in that same unnatural rhythm. 3 pulses, pause. 2 pulses. "Why is it following us?" she asked. "I don't think it's following," I said, surprising myself with how certain my voice sounded. "I think it's moving underneath." That night, we camped near the river, not far from where the canyon flattened into wide gravel beds. I built the fire higher than usual and told everyone to stay close. Most of them were too tired to care about my sudden seriousness. They crawled into tents soon after dinner. Only Claire and I stayed awake. The sound returned around midnight, faint through the earth, sensing with the river's flow. When I held my breath, I could feel it in my ribs. "Do you think it's alive?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I said. "Everything's alive out here, in some way." A flicker of movement caught my eye across the riverbank. Another pale shape, half hidden by fog rising from the water. It moved against the current with it. I grabbed my flashlight, but before I turned it on, the sound changed. The hum deepened into a tone that vibrated through the trees, so low it felt like pressure instead of noise. The fire snapped and shuddered as if the air had thickened. Claire clutched her knees. The ground beneath the log shifted, not trembling but pulsing. Then something rose from the soil beside the fire. At first, it looked like steam, but it had weight, shape, taller than me, almost human in outline. The surface shimmered translucent but dense, as if water had learned to stand. I couldn't move. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The thing didn't approach, it only tilted its head, slow and deliberate, as though curious. The hum stopped. The silence after was so sharp I could hear the river's smallest ripples. The figure blurred, thinning into smoke, then drew back into the ground, leaving only the faint smell of wet stone. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. "We're leaving at first light." Claire just nodded. We didn't sleep. The others woke confused at dawn to find us already packed, pale and quiet. I told them the weather was changing, that we'd cut the trip short for safety. No one argued. As we hiked out, the air felt wrong, dense, heavy, full of static. The birds were silent. Not one call the entire morning. The only sound was our boots on the dirt, and every so often, the faintest echo of that low vibration, always just at the edge of hearing. When the trail opened near the parking lot, I almost expected relief to come like a rush of wind. Instead, the silence deepened, as though the forest exhaled us and wanted us gone. Claire stopped beside me before stepping onto the gravel road. "Do you feel it?" I didn't need to ask what she meant. The ground wasn't pulsing anymore, but something under the surface still seemed awake, aware. She took one last look back toward the trees and whispered, "It's not done watching." That was yesterday. I'm writing this from the guide station in Jasper, hours from the trailhead. The others have already driven back to Edmonton. I filed the report. Routine notes only, nothing about the hum, the shape, or what we saw by the fire. I told myself it's because no one would believe it. But there's another reason. While I was unloading the gear, I found something in the bottom of one of the packs. A strip of pale blue fabric, torn clean, edges damp with soil. The same kind that hung from that tree. I'm sure I checked every pack before we left camp. I didn't sleep last night. Not because of noise. Jasper after dark can be painfully quiet, but because the silence itself seemed to pulse. Every few minutes I'd think I heard that low hum again, distant like a truck idling somewhere down the valley. Each time I stepped outside to check, the air was still. Stars sharp and cold above, pine silhouettes black against them. At 3:17 a.m., the motion sensor light outside the guide station flicked on. I keep it angled toward the trail gate, mostly for bears or elk wandering close. But the light stayed on too long, almost a full minute, and I saw no movement. I waited hand-hovering near the latch until it finally went dark again. That was when I caught a faint smell, the same rust and water tang from the campsite. By morning, the feeling of being watched hadn't lifted. I tried to occupy myself with routine, logging route data, gear inventory, checking maps. Normal motions have a way of keeping your mind from splintering. Still, when I bent to fold the tents, I found that strip of pale blue fabric again. I'd left it on the counter, intending to throw it away, but now it was damp, as if it had just come out of soil. I ran my thumb along the edge. The material felt faintly warm. That was enough for me to drop it in the trash and seal the lid. But within minutes, the smell returned, rising from the metal can. Around 9, I drove down to town to return the rental van the guests had used. The streets were calm, Tourist buses lining up, coffee steam curling from doorways. Everything ordinary. But as I waited at a light, the radio crackled. Not static exactly, more like low, deliberate tones. 3 short bursts paused too, the same rhythm. The station name on the dial flickered for a moment, replaced by blank frequency. Then, as quickly as it came, the sound vanished, replaced by the DJ's cheerful chatter about weather. I switched it off and sat there, fingers tight around the wheel, until someone honked behind me. It should have ended there. That's what I kept telling myself. Maybe it was just a sound memory, a phantom echo from stress and exhaustion. But Jasper isn't a place that lets go easily. I spent the afternoon restocking supplies in the gear shed behind the station. The shed's built half into the slope, cool and dim, the walls lined with old rope, axes, rolled tents. Around 3, I heard footsteps overhead, slow, dragging. I assumed it was one of the rangers coming by, but when I stepped out, no one was there. The light outside had shifted gray, clouds building again over the peaks. That's when I saw the prints. Not in the dirt this time, but in the thin dust coating the wooden ramp that led down to the shed door. Same shape, long ovals tapering off at the ends, pressed deep as though by something heavy but soft. The trail of them led to the edge of the slope, where the earth met the forest. I crouched and ran a finger along one of the impressions. The wood was damp beneath it, though there'd been no rain. The air suddenly smelled of cold metal. I backed inside and bolted the door. For the rest of the day, I avoided the windows. Even so, the feeling stayed, something out there, just beyond sight, waiting. Every so often, the light would dim slightly, though the clouds outside hadn't moved. The electrical hum in the air thickened until it felt like pressure on the skull. At dusk, a knock came on the front door. Not loud, just one solid rap. Then silence. I froze at my desk. The sound came again, same rhythm, 3 knocks, pause 2. I grabbed my flashlight and called out, "Station's closed!" No reply. When I opened the door a few inches, no one stood there. Only the smell again, earth and iron. I scanned the gravel lot, the tree line, the empty road. Everything still. Then, faintly, I heard my name. It came from the woods beyond the lot, low and drawn out. Yvonne. I felt the words more than heard them. They vibrated in my chest, soft and slow, as though the ground itself had spoken. I shut the door and locked it, backing away until I hit the far wall. After that, I don't remember moving to the chair. I must have sat there all night, flashlight in hand, heart racing every time the building creaked. When dawn came, the air outside was heavy with fog. I told myself I'd drive to the main ranger post in Hinton, report what I could. Before leaving, I took one last look out the window and froze. Across the clearing, half veiled by mist, stood the shape. Same height, same fluid edges, still a stone. It faced the station directly, no features visible, yet I felt the weight of its attention. My breath clouded the glass. I stepped back slowly, the boards underfoot faintly vibrating. Then, as the fog thickened, the figure dissolved into it. I left within minutes. The drive down the Icefields Parkway should have been beautiful that morning. Mountains rising pale in the early light, elk grazing by the road, but the world felt drained of sound. Even the tires on asphalt seemed muted. Every few miles, the hum came through the chassis, faint but steady. I turned off the engine at one pull-out to test it, and still, under the silence, the rhythm persisted. 3, pause 2. By the time I reached Hinton, I'd half convinced myself it was mechanical resonance, maybe something in the tires or the road surface. But then I noticed the roadside gravel vibrating, little puffs of dust lifting in time with the unseen pulse. At the ranger station, I tried to explain only what I could prove: strange sounds near Medicine Lake, possible seismic activity, unusual prints. The officer on duty, a man named DeVirux, nodded politely, jotting notes while glancing at the clock. When I mentioned the prints, he said, "Probably elk in soft soil." I almost laughed. I wanted to, but instead I just said, "Yeah, maybe." Before leaving, I used their landline to call Claire. I still had her number from the trip forms. It rang twice before she picked up. "Van." Her voice was tight, brittle.
"Yeah."
"I just wanted to check you got home okay." A long pause. Then, "Did you feel it again?" The question hit me harder than I expected. You mean the hum, she said. It's under my floor. My throat went dry. Since when? Since last night, she whispered. It started around midnight. My cat won't go near the kitchen. The tiles, they move. I didn't know what to say. She breathed shallowly on the other end, and I realized I could faintly hear it through the phone, the same low rhythm, distant but there. Don't go near it, I said finally. I think it's listening, she said. When I stop moving, it stops too. Then the line went dead. I called back 3 times, no answer. By sunset, I was already halfway back toward Jasper. I told myself it was duty, that I couldn't leave gear unaccounted for, but that wasn't true. Something in me needed to know if it was still there waiting. When I reached the edge of the park, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel. The peaks were fading into shadow. As I crossed the wooden bridge over the Athabasca River, my headlights flickered. The dashboard clock froze for exactly 6 seconds. When the lights came back, I noticed a dark smear along the railing ahead, mud, fresh and wet. I slowed, rolled down the window. The smell hit first, that same metallic dampness. Then I saw it, a print pressed deep into the wood. Long, narrow, tapering to nothing. I didn't stop. By the time I reached the station again, night had fallen. I parked with the headlights aimed straight at the front door. The building looked different somehow, smaller, crouched. The windows reflected light oddly, as if something stood just inside. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, until the headlights flickered again. In the brief blackout that followed, something moved across the beam. A tall outline, gliding, not walking. When the light returned, it was gone. Now it's close to midnight again. I'm writing this by lantern, trying not to look at the windows. The hum has returned, stronger this time, steady as a heartbeat. The floorboards pulse with it. I can't tell if it's coming from beneath the station or from inside the walls. All I know is that when I hold my breath, it matches mine. By the second night back at the station, the sound wasn't just under the floor anymore. It was inside the walls. I could feel it more than hear it, a slow push through the wood like a tide pressing against the structure itself. Every nail seemed to hum in its own frequency. At 200 a.m., I finally broke and went outside. The fog was thick enough to swallow the porch light within a few feet. I carried my flashlight but didn't turn it on at first. The hum was clearer in the open air, spreading through the ground like static through water. I crouched, pressed my palm to the gravel. The vibration wasn't random. It pulsed in patterns, like speech slowed beyond comprehension. I stood again, scanning the tree line. Something about the way the fog moved wasn't right. It didn't drift but folded, like curtains drawn by invisible hands. Shapes flickered behind it, too quick to hold on to. I turned on the beam, slicing white through the gray. The light hit something tall about 30 yards out, smooth and motionless. Who's there? The question came out too loud, the kind of shout you regret as soon as it leaves your mouth. The shape didn't move. I took 2 steps forward, the gravel crunching under my boots, and then the light blinked. When it steadied, the thing was closer. It hadn't moved in the ordinary sense, it was just less far. I backed toward the door. The air between us felt heavy, dense enough that breathing took effort. The hum climbed an octave, now a low moan that seemed to come from every direction. I flung myself back inside, slammed the door through the bolt. The vibration stopped instantly. Not faded, stopped. Silence returned so sudden it made my ears ring. For a while I just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the door. My flashlight beam shook across the walls. Dust motes floated lazily through the light. Nothing moved, but the stillness didn't feel safe. It felt like holding your breath underwater. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor, back to the door, listening to the boards creak one by one. Somewhere near dawn, exhaustion overtook fear. I must have fallen asleep because I woke to sunlight flooding the windows and the sound of a knock. Just one. I jolted upright, disoriented. The knock came again, slow, deliberate. I yanked the door open, half expecting the figure. Instead, a man in a Parks Canada uniform stood there, maybe mid-50s, silver beard, calm face. His name tag read D. Sommers. "Morning," he said. "You the guide who reported disturbances near Medicine Lake?" I nodded, still half in shock.
Yeah.
You at the district office? He smiled faintly. Called in to check on some seismic activity. Locals have been hearing things too. Strange resonance under the ground. Thought I'd drop by. I let him in, grateful for another living voice. Over coffee, I told him what I could without sounding insane. The vibrations, the prints, the fabric. He listened without interrupting, expression unreadable. When I finished, he said quietly, "You ever notice how still this valley gets before a freeze?" I frowned. "You mean the way the air just stops?" "Exactly. Like everything holding its breath," he said. "Happened last time I was here too. Few years back. Different guide."
Same trail. Same. I stopped.
"What happened to them?" He looked out the window before answering. Didn't come back. Something in the way he said it wasn't bureaucratic. It was personal. Somers stood, brushing crumbs from his uniform. "Mind if I take a look out back?" I followed him to the slope behind the station, where the ground dipped toward the tree line. The air there smelled faintly metallic. He crouched, pressed his hand to the soil, then glanced at me. "Feel that?" he asked. I did. A faint pulse, steady and deep like a heartbeat beneath the earth. He stood slowly. "This ground sits over a limestone cavity network. Hundreds of miles of tunnels. Water moves through them like veins. Sometimes air gets trapped and causes resonance. So it's natural?" I asked. He gave a small, non-committal shrug. "Mostly. But every now and then, the sound changes pitch. That's when it's not air." I stared at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means there are things in the rock that move differently," he said. "Old water channels, maybe, or something older than that." Before I could press him, his radio crackled faintly. 3 short bursts, paused too. He frowned, tapped it, and the sound cut off. Signal interference. He muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He left an hour later, promising to file a report. His truck rolled away down the gravel road until the sound faded completely. I told myself I felt better having spoken to someone official. But around dusk, when I stepped outside again, his tire tracks were gone. Not just covered by wind or dust, gone. The gravel lay perfectly smooth, like no vehicle had passed. The hum returned with nightfall. This time it came in waves, rolling through the valley like a living thing. The power flickered twice, then died completely. The station dropped into blackness. I lit the lantern and checked the windows. Through the glass I could see the fog thickening again, the same folding motion, inward and outward. When I looked long enough, I could almost make out shapes forming within it, arms, faces, contours that dissolved if I blinked. Then came another sound, not humming but whispering, soft and close. The words were impossible to catch, like syllables reversed. The whispering moved around the station, circling. Every time I turned my head, it shifted sides. I stepped back from the window, grabbed the radio. Static. Then faintly under the crackle, the same rhythm of tones Somers' radio had made. 3 paused too. The whispering stopped. From outside came a slow scrape, as if something heavy were being dragged through the gravel toward the door. I didn't move. The sound reached the threshold, paused, then nothing. Silence again. I counted seconds under my breath. 10, 20, 30. Then the floor under my boots flexed slightly, rising and falling as though something massive shifted beneath it. The lantern swayed on the table. A thin crack appeared along the wall near the baseboard, dust spilling from it. A low groan followed, the kind that starts deep in the ground and climbs into the air until it feels like pressure in your teeth. My knees went weak. I stumbled back as the boards beneath the rug bulged upward. Something was coming through. The rug lifted in a slow ripple. Beneath it, the floorboard split, and from the gap rose a column of air thick enough to scatter the lantern flame. It twisted, solidifying at its base, taking on that same shimmering form I'd seen by the river, tall, indistinct, almost human. This time it didn't vanish. It leaned forward, its surface rippling like water against glass. Within it, faint patterns flickered, faces maybe, or reflections of faces, mine among them. The hum deepened into a tone so low it blurred thought. My pulse synchronized with it, every beat matching its rhythm. I felt my body lean forward against my will, drawn toward the thing. Then, From somewhere outside, a voice called my name. It was Sommers.
Ivan!
The sound snapped the trance. I stumbled backward, slamming into the desk. The thing quivered, then collapsed inward, sucked back into the gap. The hum cut off. I ran outside. Flashlight trembling. No truck, no footprints, nothing. Only fog curling low over the grass. The air was dead still. When I turned back to the station, the windows were glowing faintly from inside. Not bright, just enough to outline the frames. The glow pulsed 3 beats, paused 2. I didn't go back in. Instead, I walked down the road toward the main highway, lights sweeping the gravel in wide arcs. After a few hundred meters, I realized the hum was following me again. Through the ground, in perfect rhythm with my steps, I didn't look back. By dawn, I reached a service outpost and called in an emergency line. The operator transferred me twice before someone from Parks Canada agreed to send a team. They're supposed to arrive tomorrow. I told them the truth, or most of it. I said there might be a sinkhole forming under the station, possible structural collapse. They asked if I could stay nearby to direct the crew. I said yes. Now I'm sitting in the back of my truck on the service road, engine off. The valley below is filled with mist again, layered like smoke. Every few minutes, something flickers in it, faint as breath on glass. The hum hasn't stopped once since sunset, and somewhere in that fog, I swear I see a figure. Tall, pale, perfectly still, standing exactly where the station should be. The Parks Canada crew arrived just after noon. 2 trucks, 4 people. Their tires hissed on the gravel as they rolled up the service road toward the station. I was waiting near the pullout, leaning against my own truck, running on maybe an hour of sleep. The lead geotech was a woman named Mara Kincaid. Mid-40s, practical eyes, the kind of voice that made you believe she'd seen worse. She shook my hand and got straight to business. You reported ground movement under the floor? Yeah, I said. And vibration. It's been constant since yesterday. Any visible subsidence? Not yet. She glanced at the ridge line, the trees beyond the fog. We've had similar reports along the valley. Locals think it's minor seismic activity. We'll set up sensors, check soil resonance. The other 3, a technician, a hydrologist, and a younger ranger, started unloading equipment. Aluminum tripods, seismic plates, cabling, reels of wire. The steady rhythm of work should have been comforting, but it only sharpened the quiet. As they spread out, I noticed the fog thickening again near the slope behind the station. It didn't drift evenly, it pulsed. None of them seemed to see it. Kincaid knelt by the soil with a handheld meter. The screen flashed irregularly. That's odd, she muttered. Frequency oscillation at 17 hertz. Too low for groundwater flow. What's that mean? I asked. She frowned. Could be an air cavity, or something else resonating down there. Her tone had changed, a notch of curiosity mixed with unease. She looked up at me. Show me exactly where you felt the movement. I led her inside. The air was cooler than outside, still heavy with that metallic scent. The floorboards around the desk bore faint discolorations now, like moisture rising from beneath. Right here, I said. Last night it pushed upward. She crouched, pressed her palm flat against the wood. Her eyes narrowed. It's warm. She tapped the floor with her knuckles, once, twice. The second tap came back hollow. There's a void under this section. One of her team fetched a probe, a steel rod with a depth gauge, and drove it through the seam between planks. It sank easily for about a meter before hitting something soft that gave slightly. The gauge needle wavered, then stilled. That's not soil, the hydrologist said. Could be a collapsed burrow. Kincaid answered. Let's open it. They pried the boards loose. Underneath was compacted silt, gray-black and faintly wet. The smell hit immediately iron, mineral old rot. Kincaid set a small sensor into the hole. The readout began to pulse with that same rhythm I'd memorized. 3, pause, 2. She frowned. It's repeating in intervals, like a coded pattern. Her tech laughed uneasily. Maybe the rocks are trying to talk. No one laughed with him. The hum deepened, audible now through the open gap. You didn't hear it so much as feel it in your sternum, like standing near heavy machinery. The tools on the floor rattled. A lantern shifted an inch by itself. Kincaid snapped. Shut down the generator. The young ranger ran outside, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, layers of tone folding together until the air itself seemed to shimmer. Then the floor moved. It didn't collapse or break, it breathed. The exposed silt rose and fell like a lung under fabric. Something beneath it pushed upward, slow, deliberate. The probe clattered sideways. "Everyone out!" Kincaid yelled. We stumbled through the doorway into the yard. The ground there trembled, ripples running through the gravel. From the slope behind the station, a thin plume of mist burst upward, twisting like smoke. The hum broke into fragments, bursts of tone and silence that almost sounded like words, or something imitating them. Then came the first crack. The station's foundation split along its base with a dry, wooden pop. The boards heaved, windows bursting outward. The mist poured through the openings, thick and luminous in the sunlight. Within it, I glimpsed movement, shapes forming, stretching, folding back. One of the crew shouted, but the sound vanished into the noise. It wasn't just loud. It filled the body, vibrating bone and blood alike. Kincaid grabbed my sleeve. "Back to the trucks!" We ran. The fog followed, sliding low over the ground like water running downhill. The hum shifted again, aligning with our footfalls. 3 beats. Pause 2. When we reached the pullout, the sound stopped abruptly. The silence afterward was worse. The air smelled scorched, though nothing had burned. Kincaid doubled over, hands on her knees. That wasn't seismic. Her technician stood staring back at the station. The building sagged slightly now, like something beneath it had hollowed out the earth. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. No one answered. They spent the next hour setting up external sensors around the perimeter, though I could tell none of them wanted to go near the building again. Kincaid kept glancing toward the slope, eyes distant. Around 3, she called headquarters on the satellite phone. I only caught fragments. Unstable cavity, noxious emission, possible sinkhole. When she hung up, her face was pale. "They're sending a larger team tomorrow," she said quietly. "Until then, we cordon this area and stay at the outpost down the road." I should have felt relief. But as we drove away, I looked in the side mirror and saw the fog already crawling back across the clearing, thickening around the station like a tide returning. That night at the outpost, none of us slept much. The power flickered every few hours. Around midnight, one of the motion sensors they'd left behind triggered. Its feed displayed on a small monitor near the desk, grainy black and white, time-stamped. For a long minute, nothing moved. Then, from the edge of frame, a pale shape entered view, tall, fluid, indistinct. It glided toward the building, stopped at the doorway, and leaned in. The screen flared white, then went dark. Kincaid switched it off without a word. No one spoke until dawn. The next morning, she insisted we go back. I tried to argue, said the site was unstable, unsafe, but she only said, "If we don't document it, someone else will, and they'll be less careful." So we returned. The fog was gone, leaving the valley startlingly clear. The station still stood, though warped. The boards near the entrance had dark stains spreading outward like veins. Kincaid's team unpacked new sensors. I stayed near the trucks, scanning the tree line. The silence was total again. No birds, no wind. When Kincaid knelt to place another probe, the ground shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to tilt the tripod a few degrees. Then the hum began anew. It was softer this time, almost melodic. Kincaid froze, hand hovering above the soil. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were listening to something beautiful. "Mara," I said. "Step back." She didn't move.
"Mara."
I ran toward her just as the ground beneath her hand rippled. A thin column of vapor rose, coiling around her wrist like smoke. She gasped and fell backward, staring at her palm. The skin there was wet and faintly luminous, as if lit from beneath. The hum grew louder. The soil at the base of the slope began to crack open. Slow but unstoppable. The others shouted, hauling equipment toward the trucks. I pulled Kincaid to her feet, dragging her back. She was trembling, eyes unfocused. "It's showing me something," she whispered. "Structures, caverns. It's alive down there. Don't look at it," I said, gripping her shoulders. "Don't listen." She blinked, as if surfacing from water, and nodded weakly. We barely made it to the road before the ground caved. A section of the clearing sank inward, swallowing the station whole. The sound that followed wasn't impact but release, a long exhale from the earth itself. The fog shot upward in one final plume, then dispersed. Silence again. The site is gone now. Nothing left but a circular depression, maybe 20 meters across. The soil around it still glows faintly at night, a dull gray light you can see from the road. Kincaid's hand hasn't stopped glowing either. She's in the infirmary at the Hinton Post, wrapped in bandages that hum softly when the room gets quiet. The Parks Canada officials are already writing it off as a landslide, pending further geological evaluation. They've told us not to discuss the details with media, but the hum hasn't stopped. Not for me. Even here, miles away, I can feel it under the floor of my cabin. 3 beats, pause, 2. Always the same. When I hold my breath long enough, it aligns with my pulse again. And every so often, the dishes in the sink tremble, not from wind or passing trucks, but in rhythm, as if something deep beneath Jasper is still breathing, waiting for me to answer. They released Kincaid from the Hinton Infirmary 3 days later. Her hand was still bandaged, but the doctors said she'd regained full circulation and no sign of necrosis. They didn't mention the sound, the low vibration that made the metal trays buzz when she flexed her fingers. I drove her back toward Jasper in silence. She stared out the window, pale sunlight shifting across her face. The skin around the bandage was bruised a faint gray, as if the light beneath it had moved deeper. They told me to rest, she said finally, but I keep dreaming about tunnels. Hundreds of them. Moving. I glanced over. Moving. She nodded, like veins, pulsing. Each time I wake up, the sound's in my chest. We stopped at a gas station outside town. As I filled the tank, I noticed the fuel nozzle trembling slightly in my hand. 3 pulses. Pause, 2. The pump's digital display flickered once, then steadied. "Do you feel that?" I asked. She didn't answer. She was staring at the mountains. "It's spreading," she said quietly. That night, I returned to my cabin near Bouvert Lake, a place that used to feel safe, but the stillness there was worse than any noise. Every log, every floorboard seemed to carry that faint internal hum. I turned off the lights and listened. It didn't 2 a.m. I got a call from one of Kincaid's technicians, Aaron. His voice shook. "Evan, something's happening at the site. You need to see this." The line crackled. Behind his voice, I heard the same pattern. 3 low tones, pause, 2. "What do you mean happening?" The ground's glowing again. It's louder. The call dropped before I could respond. I drove back toward the valley in the dark, headlights catching mist rolling low over the road. The forest on either side looked skeletal. Gray trunks, no movement. When I reached the cordon, both trucks were gone. Only the equipment cases remained, scattered near the sinkhole. The pit itself had widened, twice its previous size. From its center, a dim light pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat through water. I shut off the engine and stepped out. The air buzzed faintly, static curling the hairs on my arms. The hum rose as I approached the rim. My breath fogged in front of me, though the night wasn't cold. The sound pressed through the soles of my boots, climbing up my spine. Then I saw them. At the bottom of the depression stood 3 figures, not distinct pale, fluid shapes bending with the rhythm. They didn't cast shadows. They swayed together like reeds underwater. And in the moment before I stepped back, I realized there were more. Half-formed outlines moving just beyond them, merging with the light. The ground beneath my feet softened. I stumbled backward and ran to the truck. The hum followed, building until the metal panels vibrated. I started the engine and drove without looking in the mirrors. When I reached cell signal again, I tried calling Aaron. His number went straight to voicemail. The next morning, Parks Canada issued a short statement. Due to geological instability, the Medicine Lake Field Office area will remain closed to the public until further notice. They didn't mention the missing team. I met Kincaid again that afternoon. She looked worse, eyes sunken, her voice a whisper. The light under her skin had faded to a dull gray, but when she moved, it pulsed faintly. "They're not missing," she said before I even asked. "They're underneath." "Under what?" "The park," she said. "All of it." I didn't want to believe her, but when she handed me her field recorder, I stopped arguing. She'd played it back dozens of times already. The first half was static and wind. Then came a low voice, not human, not mechanical. It was the same rhythm translated into tone, a rough approximation of language. 3 tones, pause 2, then a whisper below. I played it again, slower this time. The word wasn't quite English. It was more like the sound of air escaping through rock. But once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. Below. That night, the hum returned stronger than ever. It came through the floorboards, the walls, the window panes. Even the glass of water on my desk trembled. When I stepped outside, the stars seemed to blur, as if the sky itself was vibrating. Across the lake, faint lights flickered among the trees. At first I thought it was distant campers, until the lights began to move upward, slowly vertically, through the canopy. By morning, the newspapers in Jasper carried headlines about mysterious low-frequency disturbances. Residents claimed their windows rattled all night. One article quoted a geologist calling it a unique resonance event. Another quoted an old guide who said simply, "The ground's waking up." Kincaid called me again that afternoon. "It's not staying in Jasper," she said. "Reports from Banff, Yoho, even up toward Mount Robson. The pattern's identical." "What pattern?" 3, pause 2, she said. "Always the same." Her voice cracked. "It's not just under us. It's moving through the rock. Like it's searching." That night I dreamed of the sinkhole. In the dream I stood at the edge, looking down into the light. Beneath the surface were corridors, stone veins twisting alive. They pulsed with slow rhythm, drawing breath from somewhere deeper still. When I woke, my cabin was shaking. Not violently, just enough that dust sifted from the rafters. The lake outside was perfectly still, yet small ripples radiated from the shore, spreading in the same pulse. By midday, the highway into Jasper was closed. The official line, geological hazard and infrastructure damage. Unofficially, people were leaving. Locals packed trucks, storefronts shuttered. The town felt hollow, a place holding its breath. I found Kincaid in her truck outside the ranger headquarters. Her hands were bare this time. The skin had turned translucent, veins glowing faintly silver beneath. "I think it's using us," she said. "Conductors. It needs resonance to travel. That's why it mimics sound. It moves through vibration." I stared at her, speechless. "Listen." She held out her hand. The hum came through her skin, faint but distinct. "It's in me now." Before I could respond, a low rumble rolled through the valley. Not thunder, something deeper. The pavement trembled. Birds exploded from the treetops in a dark wave. We drove to the overlook above the old station site. The sinkhole was gone. In its place stretched a smooth, circular plain of ash-colored soil, perfectly level. From the center rose thin pillars of mist that bent in the windless air. Then the hum began again, louder than ever, so strong it blurred vision. The air shimmered, distorting trees, sky, horizon. And beneath the roar another tone, higher, almost human. I realized it was voices. Not one, but hundreds, layered beneath the hum, speaking in a language that felt too familiar and too wrong all at once. Kincaid gripped the dashboard. "It's calling something up." "What?" She turned to me, eyes wide. That faint light flickering behind them. Itself. The ground cracked in long, radiating lines, light seeping upward from below. The pattern spread across the valley like a map being drawn from within. Then, just as suddenly, silence. Every sound, wind, insects, the ticking engine vanished. For one endless moment, the world held still. Then everything exhaled. The light withdrew into the cracks, the mist folded downward, and the hum faded. The valley looked unchanged, but the silence had weight to it now, like a held note waiting for resolution. Kincaid's head fell against the window. Her breathing steadied. The glow in her hands dimmed to nothing. "It's finished," she murmured. "For now." I wanted to believe her, but when I turned on the radio for the drive back, the static that filled the speakers wasn't random. 3 tones, pause, 2, and faintly beneath them, her voice recorded from the field unit, whispering the same single word, "below." 2 weeks later, Jasper was empty. Not evacuated, not abandoned, just quiet. The park gates still stood open, The town still held shape, but the hum had driven everything living to silence. No birds, no insects. Even the rivers ran soundless, as if the current had been swallowed. I told myself I wouldn't go back. Every instinct said leave, let the mountain bury its secret. But silence builds its own gravity, and the longer I stayed away, the stronger it pulled. So on the 15th night, I drove north alone. The highway was a tunnel of fog, headlight beams fading after a few meters. Every signpost hummed faintly when I passed, the metal singing in low resonance. By the time I reached the old turnoff near Medicine Lake, the radio had gone dead again. The silence in that valley was absolute, the kind that pressed behind your eyes. The sinkhole plain lay just as we'd left it, flat ash-colored, ringed by warped trees. The soil glowed faintly enough to see without light. I parked the truck and stepped out, each footfall sending ripples through the ground, like stepping on shallow water frozen from below. For a moment, I thought the hum had stopped for good. Then it started again, soft, measured, familiar. 3 pulses. Pause. 2. Always the same? I crouched, touched the soil. It was warm. The vibration moved through my fingers into my wrist, aligning with my pulse until the 2 were indistinguishable. I whispered, "I'm here," and the ground answered with a slow exhale of air. The mist rose. It came from fissures invisible until that moment, thin cracks spreading outward, glowing with dull light. The air thickened, full of static, and somewhere deep beneath me came a noise like rock grinding against bone. Then I heard my name. Avon. The voice wasn't Kincaid's. It wasn't anyone's I'd known. It came from beneath, drawn out like breath through stone. I stood slowly, scanning the plain. The mist had begun to form shapes again, human at first glance, but taller, proportions subtly wrong. They gathered in a wide ring around the center, swaying in the same rhythm as the hum. 1 step forward. Its outline flickered, transparent one moment, solid the next. Beneath the surface, faint shadows moved like organs in translucent skin. I wanted to step back but didn't. Something deeper than fear kept me still. "What are you?" I asked. Though I don't know if I spoke aloud. The figure tilted its head. Its surface rippled. Then the hum shifted, slower, heavier. The sound pressed through my chest, drawing words out of me without consent. Below, I heard myself say. The ground underfoot gave way, not collapsing but opening, folding inward like the surface of water when a weight sinks through. I dropped to my knees, hands sinking into soil that no longer felt like soil. Beneath it, I saw light, pale, endless, moving. It wasn't empty down there. The tunnels we'd seen on the instruments weren't just caves. They were veins. The whole valley pulsed like a living body, and somewhere in its depth, a heartbeat thundered, slow, massive, older than the mountains above it. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt recognition. The hum wasn't calling me, it was answering. The figure reached toward me, its hand, or the shape of one, pressing lightly against my chest. My ribs vibrated. My vision split into white and black lines like light through deep water. For an instant I saw inside it. Not organs, not bone. Faces hundreds layered. Some shifting like reflections, others perfectly still. Among them I saw Kincaid's. Her mouth moved though no sound reached me. Then the hum spiked into a single, piercing tone that erased everything else. When I came to, I was lying at the edge of the plain. My truck's headlights were still on, though the battery should have died hours ago. The air was cold now, the soil dry and dull, no glow remaining. The hum was gone. For the first time in weeks, the valley was silent. I stood, legs shaking, and looked toward the center. The mist had vanished. No sign of movement, no sign of the figures. Only the faint outline of something circular carved into the ground. An imprint, like a seal pressed into clay. I walked to it slowly. At its center lay a fragment of something hard, stone or bone, impossible to tell. Etched along its surface were 5 indentations, 3 close together, a small gap, then 2. I pocketed it without thinking. The drive back took twice as long. Dawn broke over the peaks in weak gray light, revealing smoke rising from the direction of town. When I arrived, I realized it wasn't smoke at all. It was fog, dense and still, pooling along the streets. The hum had followed, not as sound, but as motion. Windows shivered faintly. Power lines swayed without wind. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn blared once, then cut off mid-note. Kinkid's truck sat outside the ranger headquarters, door open, engine running. She was gone. Only her field recorder remained on the seat, still running. I pressed play. At first, nothing but static. Then faint breathing, then her voice, distant calm. "It's not beneath us anymore. We brought it up." A pause. Then a second voice, identical to mine, said softly, "Below." The tape ended. That was 4 days ago. Since then, the phenomenon has spread beyond Jasper. Reports from Banff, Revelstoke, even as far east as Canmore. All the same vibrating ground, lights beneath the soil, animals disappearing into cracks that close behind them. I've driven as far as Edmonton trying to outrun it, but at night the sound returns. Through the pavement, through the walls, through me. I can feel it now as I write, steady, patient, the rhythm matching my heartbeat perfectly. When I stop to listen, there's no difference between the two. The fragment from the valley sits on the desk beside me, faintly warm. Sometimes, if I stare too long, it moves, not visibly but enough to shift its shadow. I think it's waiting. The others on the radio, scientists, rangers, even military, keep arguing over cause, seismic anomaly, magnetic resonance, mass hysteria. None of them mention the word that keeps echoing in my head every time I close my eyes. Below. It's not a location. It's an origin. Whatever lived under Jasper didn't emerge. It awoke. We only opened the skin. I can feel it spreading now, the pulse sensing with everything built on Earth. Pipes, wires, tracks, bones. A network relearning how to breathe. The last time I stepped outside, the ground no longer felt solid. Each step sank slightly as if the soil remembered being softer. Tonight, I'll go back one final time. The fragment's glow grows brighter the closer I drive toward the mountains. Maybe if I return it, the hum will stop. Or maybe it'll finally let me understand what it's been saying all along. If anyone finds this recording, don't look for me. Don't go near the valley. Listen to the ground instead. If you hear 3 pulses, then 2, it's already beneath you. And when it breathes in, hold still.